Good morning, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for today's episode of Cozy Morning Horror. As so many of you often tell me, you enjoy these morning stories because they keep you company while you're driving to work, doing housework, maybe just sitting around and relaxing, maybe out for a run, who knows. But I'm glad that you carry me with you where you go. Now then, enough of that. Let's get right into our first story. Today's first story is a bit of a cautionary tale, a bit of a reason why maybe it's best not to go feed the cats. For context, my mom has always been a little crazy. Never drowned me in the bathtub crazy. Just a little off. Like sometimes she was living in a different world than the rest of us. Like when she looked at you, she knew in her heart that you were less real than her. I remember being really little and walking into her room to find her crying over a heap of her clothes on the ground. She had scissors in her hand, and she was cutting out every spot of purple she found. "I can't see it anymore, Cassie," she said through the sobs. "I can't see the colors I'm supposed to see anymore." I went and hid in my room after that. When my dad came home, he found me locked in my room and asked me what was wrong. I explained what had happened with Mom, and he just sighed and went to talk to her. What I couldn't explain was that I hadn't locked the door because I was afraid of her. I had locked it because it felt like an added barrier between myself and the reality that my mother wasn't okay. When they divorced, I don't remember any particular incident that broke the camel's back. It felt more like an inevitable conclusion that we had all accepted for years by the time it finally happened. What I do remember is listening to my dad read off a list of the big crazy moments from their marriage. Some of them were a surprise to me, like him coming home to find her hiding in a closet with a knife. Most of them, though, I remembered all too well. So when the judge looked at me and asked if what my father was saying was true, it was all I could do to nod back at her. Needless to say, my dad got custody of me. Even at 12, I knew that, regardless of his case, there had still been a chance of things not going his way. Afterwards, we went to Sullivan's and ate our weight in ice cream sundaes. I knew that it wasn't easy for him to raise me alone, but I also know that he was doing his best. My father was a 46-year-old middleware technician when he chose to become a single parent. He worked long hours for little pay, but still found time to tutor me in math and come to my track meets. He was patient. He was gentle. He was my hero. But all of that is just a lead-up to my story, right? It turned out that a few months ago, my mom got in contact with my dad. She said that she was getting treatment, that she wanted to make reparations. She gave him the number of her psychiatrist, who my dad promptly called. The man on the other end of the line assured my dad that his ex-wife wasn't the same person from 4 years prior. He said that she had changed, and that she was getting better. He promised that getting closure with my dad and me was vital to her healing. At first, Dad refused. He was convinced that no amount of medication or therapy would change the woman who had haunted him and his daughter all those years. Eventually, though, he met her. He says it was just to get her off his back, to put the final nail in the coffin. Instead, he realized that she really was acting different, more lucid, more stable. They met a few more times, and with each meeting he became more and more convinced that she had gotten better, that this time it would be different. When he walked into the house after seeing her, I couldn't tell what he was feeling. It felt like some kind of exhausted hope, the kind that shouldn't still have a pulse, kind of undead yearning. He needed help. I'd known that for years. He was working himself to the bone trying to take care of both of us. When I'd been born, my dad had signed up to be a part-time team member. Now it was just him and the growing shadows under his eyes. When he gently asked if I wanted to see Mom again, I nodded enthusiastically. Not for her or me, but for him. "It is so good to see you, sweetheart." Those were the first words she said to me when she sat down across from me at McDonald's. "I can't begin to apologize for everything I must have put you through." She looked better. I think after all those years, my memories of the way she acted and the way she made me feel had blended together into a flat nightmare. The woman squeezing my hand wasn't scary. It even felt appropriately motherly, though it made my skin itch. We met occasionally for months. We were alone once or twice when my dad had to step out for a work call. When we were, she would tell me about her group therapy, about all the friends she was making. She told me that it took her so long to realize that her biggest problem was self-isolating. "It drove me crazy, being alone," she said, "but it's okay now. Now I'm not alone." Eventually, my mom asked Dad if I could stay with her overnight. He was clearly uncomfortable with the idea and told her that he'd have to think it over. All I could think about was the work retreat, the trips with friends, all the times that my dad had missed out on living his life to take care of me. All for me. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, if I got to a place where my mom could take on even a little bit of the burden, that he might have his life back. So I told him that I wanted to go. I begged him to let me stay with her. Eventually, he agreed. "I'll be here to pick you up at 7, he said, as he pulled my suitcase out of the car. He picked me up from track and drove me straight to the cramped apartment building where my mom lived. "On the dot. If you need me before, promise me that you'll call, okay?" I promised him, offering a pinky when he gave me a stern look. He locked it with mine and took a deep breath. "Your mother's trying," he said. "I can appreciate that. I can even respect it. But I will drive my car through her front door if it means protecting you. Understand?" I laughed at the image of his scuffed Nissan hatchback smashing through the bricks and the drywall. I squeezed his hand. The evening was fine to start with. Her 2-bedroom apartment was neat and tidy, if a little small. It had a smell, too, like the ghost of something rotten hiding in the walls. But she let me put whatever I wanted on the TV. She even brought popcorn and soda for us to eat on the couch while we watched a police procedural. When I heard the oven timer ding, I asked her what she was making, and she stood up to go check on it. "It's your favorite, honey. Tuna mac." I felt the heat drain out of my face just a little. Tuna mac wasn't my favorite. I don't think I'd ever eaten it before that night. But I told myself to shrug it off. It had been years, hadn't it? It was all right for her to have a little misplaced memory. That alone didn't mean that anything was wrong. The phone buzzed with a text from my dad. "All good?" he asked. "You're such a worrywart," I responded, after giving his question a thumbs up. We ate at the table as the procedural show wrapped up. I felt like we should be talking, sharing, but there wasn't much to say, really. The absence of conversation stretched between us like a tightrope, but we didn't dare step onto it. As I scraped the last bit of tuna mac from my bowl into the trash, Mom told me that she had picked out a movie she thought we'd like. I agreed to it and sat on the couch as she put the disc in. It was a strange movie. Scary, but not in the way that a horror movie is scary. In the way that a nightmare is scary. Like everyone around you knows something that you don't. It followed a woman with amnesia trying to understand what had happened to her. At a certain point, I got a little too weirded out. The strange dream logic of the movie was like a headache I couldn't shake. I pulled out my phone and started to scroll through social media, trying to do so in a way that Mom wouldn't noticed. I shouldn't have worried. She was so enthralled by the movie that she was leaning expectantly forward, her eyes full of excitement and hunger. Just over halfway through, however, She suddenly grabbed my knee with an intensity that made me jump. I looked up at her to find that she was still looking just as intently at the TV. "Watch this. This part's my favorite," she said. I looked up at the screen to find the main character holding each other in bed, the sexual tension escalating rapidly. I felt my cheeks flush. I know how it feels to see a sex scene with your parents in the room, but this one was different. My dad always got a little uncomfortable in a way that made my discomfort feel more normal. He would usually fumble with the remote as he tried to skip through. With him, it was something to laugh about, a running joke between us. My mother's fingers digging into my skin as she commanded me to watch these two women going down on each other felt wrong, though. She shouldn't be touching me, shouldn't be encouraging me to watch. She shouldn't have that wild hunger in her eyes. I knew in my head that my mother had never been violent, had never tried to hurt me. But with her one hand on my knee, I couldn't help imagining the other one holding a knife behind her back. I felt like I was going to throw up, my throat quickly closing. I don't want to watch this," I finally blurted out. I don't think the words were even all the way out of my mouth before the TV flashed to darkness. The remote was already in her hand, like she'd been waiting for me to say something. "Okay, honey, I've got the spare room all made up for you, but before we call it a night, I need to feed my friend's cats. Can you come with me? I wouldn't feel right, leaving you all alone." She held her hand out, beckoningly to me. The hunger was gone from her eyes, leaving just the model calmness she'd had for the last few months. "How long will it take?" I asked. I'm pretty tired." "Oh, just a few minutes. I promise, honey." She looked so sincere that not believing her words would have been like spitting in the face of God. I'd be a bad daughter, a terrible daughter, if I didn't trust her. Of course, I see it now. I see that a person trying to earn back their trust wouldn't act like they had never done anything wrong. A person trying to be better would make allowances for the pain their actions had caused. For her to look at me with the eyes of a mother that had never hurt or scared me should have been the first sign that she was living in a reality different from mine. But I didn't. I couldn't see that then. So I got in the car. My stomach started churning after 15 minutes on the road. I tapped my foot on the interior carpet, feeling the moments of the car trip slip on and on. "You said this wouldn't take long," I asked eventually. "Oh, silly," she responded. "I meant feeding the cats wouldn't take long. No, my friend lives a little bit out of town, but we're almost there. Don't worry." She turned the radio up after that, a pop station that kept fading in and out of static. I could feel my body trying to take a quicker, faster breath and tried to wrestle my panic away. I tried sending my dad a quick checking-in text as we turned off the highway, but the phone buzzed a moment later to tell me the text could not be sent. By the time we pulled into the snaking gravel driveway, we'd been driving for about 45 minutes, and the radio was a hornet's nest of static. To call the place a house was generous. It was a cabin nestled in some deep woods on the outskirts of town, the kind where you can just tell that the owner declined electricity and running water for the sake of independence. "Oh, sweetie, they're just gonna love you," Mom said as she turned the car off and dropped the keys into the cup holder. Then she got out and closed the door. "The cats?" I asked, the still warm interior of the car. The inside of the cabin was no better than the outside. When I walked in, my mom was already holding a long neck lighter to a lantern, casting a dim and gloomy light around the place. The rug on the hardwood floor was moth-eaten and ragged. The rotten coffee table looked like it was ready to fall any second. The old couch was gray and muted, and I didn't want to find out if that was sun damage or dust. "So, your friend lives here?" I asked slowly. "I gotta go get some food from the shed," she called cheerily back at me, not answering the question as she stepped out the back screen door. I looked around me. No bowls or cat food, no scratching posts, not even any claw damage on the old couch. In that moment, standing in the dim light of the strange place, an unwelcome thought popped into my head. The storybook image of Hansel and Gretel being led into the woods by their father so that he could abandon them. She's not going to leave me here, I told myself. That would be crazy. The memory of her cutting the purple from her clothes was my only rebuttal. I listened closely to the silence of the night, sure that I would hear the sounds of feet on gravel, the sound of the engine turning over. Instead, through the overwhelming silence, I heard a shuffle, the creak of a board, the sound of someone trying to stay still, trying not to be perceived. Did she double back? Is she going to try to scare me? Why would she do that? I jumped when the screen door slammed open, admitting my mother and a 25-pound bag of dry cat food. "Hungry cats," I muttered. "Cats?" she asked. I saw such genuine confusion on her face that it made my eyes well up with tears. "The cats? That's what we're here to feed, right?" I said in a small voice. "Oh, hungry cats," she laughed. "Sorry, I misheard you. Yes, very hungry cats. Hungrier than you think." I helped her move the bag to the porch, where she flashed the screen of her phone around until she found a grimy dog food bowl tucked beneath the rotten benches. "There we are," she said. She haphazardly tore the bag open and spilled the kibble into the dusty bowl. "So, we can go now?" I asked. "No, sweetie," she said, turning to me with confusion. "We have to wait until the cats come to eat. Don't you know anything?" "Oh, okay," I said, my body beginning to shift and tighten in a way I'd consciously forgotten. The knowledge that the person in front of me was not living in the same reality as me shot through me like pain. The awareness that the wrong word would have my mother ripping my throat out with her teeth shook me. "So, what's your friend's name?" I asked. "What do you mean?" Her eyes were no longer on me. They were on the tree line, tracing the shadows between the trunks. "Your friend, the one who owns the house." "Yes, it's his house. He doesn't come by much anymore, but he told me I was free to visit whenever I wanted. I just had to feed the cats when I did." She turned to look at me, but I knew that she wasn't seeing her daughter. Her eyes drifted around me like she was evaluating a statue or a cut of meat. I looked away from her instinctively. I traced the same trees with my eyes, knowing that her unrelenting stare was on me all the while. Out of the corner of my eye, however, I caught movement. I concentrated on it. Without looking, I realized that I was seeing the shed where the food had been. The roof had caved in, like the victim of a violent crime. The door was hanging off its hinges. And there, poking out from behind the rotten mass of the shed, was a figure, a gray form against the shadowed backdrop of the woods. It loomed from the darkness like something was curious. "I know we might be here a while, waiting," my mom said, her eyes still on me. "Why don't you go lay down inside? I don't want you telling your father I kept you up all night." "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding 1,000 miles away. I felt like I was swimming through glass, slow and morbid. "Why don't I go lay down in the car? That way when we leave, you won't have to wake me up." "No," her voice was stern now, harsh. "You'll hurt your back in the car, Casey. Lie down on the couch." "But you're my daughter," she shouted, her voice rising in the night air. "When I tell you to go to sleep, you'll go to sleep, goddammit. Do you understand?" I felt my breath grow ragged, felt the tears falling, but I was no longer in my body. I was made of clay, soft and moldable, easy to smash and put away when you're done with it. My mom's arms were around me in an instant. "It's okay, honey. Mommy's here," she said, like she hadn't been the one to shout at me, even as she led me into the abandoned cabin. "Mommy's gonna make it better. You just need to lie down, all right?" She laid me on the dusty couch and patted my cheek with one hand. Then she walked through the door onto the porch and into the grass. "Here, kitty, 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 kitty," she began to coo. "Kitty, kitty, kitty, kitty." I needed to get up. I needed to run. I needed to get to the car, but my limbs felt heavy and weak. Like all it took was having my mother yell at me for my childhood fears to fall over me like chains. I tried to slow my breathing, to regain control of my body. I heard my mother's voice grow fainter and fainter. Was she walking away from the cabin? Was she walking into the woods? That's when I noticed the other sounds. Not the shuffling from before, not the sound of hiding. The sounds of walking, of careful, measured steps. I heard the boards creak in uneven rhythms, like something was slowly dancing, but it was all wrong. I heard the dry rasp of nails on peeling wallpaper. I heard laughter that sounded wet and dry at the same time. Something began moving against the back of the couch, and I stared with half-closed eyes as its shadow fell on the wall. In the outline cast by the dim little lantern, I saw something clamber onto the back of the couch. It perched like a gargoyle, but I could see that it was massive, the size of a man, balanced precariously on the wooden piece of furniture that groaned in protest. The thing above me emitted a low growl, like the rumble of a distant earthquake. I felt a heavy wetness hit my shoulder, and it began to run down my limp arm. I stayed still, not by choice, not because I thought it would keep me alive. In that moment, I knew that I was dead, that I would never see my dad again. I knew that I was going to be eaten or murdered or torn apart by whatever was drooling. And since I knew that to be true, I knew that there was no point in running, no point in fighting. It was over. All that was left was to accept that. "There you are, you nasty thing." My mom's voice cut through the tension like a flashlight through darkness. "Your friends are all out here. Don't worry, you can play with her later after she's had her nap." Through the slits of my eyelids, I watched as the shadow of the figure leapt heavily to the ground. It danced violently into view, spinning in slow, uneven circles before it came to rest on all fours by my mother's feet. It looked mostly human, but the proportions were wrong. The arms were too long, the knees bent at impossible angles. As it followed my mom through the door, it looked back at me. Where the eyes should have been were spheres of black glass. The surrounding skin was mottled and scarred in horrible twisting patterns. As it smiled, I saw that where the flat chiclet teeth should have been were instead sharp splinters of bone that seemed to bleed freely, long rivulets of bloody drool spilling onto the hardwood. It cocked its head at me, the black glass looking into my soul. Then it leaned its head back, inhaled long and deep, and followed my mother through the door. "Good kitty," I heard my mother say from the porch. Her voice was drowned out by the sound of dry food being shattered by sharp teeth. The back door, that was all I could think of. That rusted screen door was my only hope of escape. I slid myself off the couch as quietly as possible, my knee landing softly on the tattered rug. I stayed low to the ground and crept around the couch, stepping only on the boards that looked steady. "She'll be so excited to meet you, pretty girl," my mom said, still cooing to the thing on the porch. "And I know you'll be happy to see her, too. I promised you more wet food, didn't I?" Once I reached the screen door, I took a deep breath. The door had been loud when my mom had opened it earlier. Looking at the rusty springs holding the door closed, I could only hope that they had been the source. As I put my hands to the spring, a sound from the porch burrowed into my shaking bones. It was somewhere between a howl and a gasp, the sound of air running over broken windpipes, a song I didn't want to hear. It spoke to a deep, ancient part of my brain. It told me to hide. Shaking worse than ever now, I pulled at the spring just enough to pop it off the screw. holding it to the door. Then, my breath still, I pushed the door open and hoped for the best. It didn't make a sound, at least, not over the yowling on the porch. It swung open in silent invitation to the darkness. All that panic, all that fear wouldn't let me be careful anymore. I could see the nose of the car in the carport, could practically taste the dust covering the tires. I couldn't wait. My feet were quiet as I ran through the grass, but the second I stepped onto the gravel of the carport, the porch singing stopped. "Cassie," my mother called. "Honey, where are you?" In moments of true panic, I've never experienced time moving faster or slower, like people always describe. For me, things just start happening all at once. In my mind, there's no delineation between the moment I pulled the door open, the moment I scrambled for the keys, or the moment I snapped the car into reverse. They all happen simultaneously, like photographs, spinning in open air. As I changed gears to drive, however, I remember my mother standing in front of the car. The headlights played across the fabric of her dress. The dust kicked up by the car obscured her and the half-dozen creatures flanking her on either side. And in her eyes, I saw real hurt, a genuine sense of betrayal. "What are you doing?" I saw her mouth. I didn't answer, in flagrant violation of the 3 months I had before I could drive a car without a guardian present. I tore down the driveway and away from this madness. I took every curve inadvisably fast, feeling the inertia of the car trying to buck me every time. I drove so fast that the cloud of dust behind me quickly obscured the house from view. Good riddance. I was almost to the main road when I caught sight of the thing out of the corner of my eye. It was one of the creatures, the one from inside the house, loping easily alongside my reckless driving. Its glass eyes weren't looking ahead of it, however. They were locked on me, and as it stared me down with its smile, I knew one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. I had only imagined that these things were human, maybe deformed or mutated, but still human. Even driven insane with pain, a human could be reasoned with, empathized with, on some level. But these weren't humans. They had never been humans, not by a long shot. In that smile gleaming with blood, in the contortion of muscles where eyes should have been, I knew that these were something else, some other. That wasn't the shape of a human becoming an alien, but of something alien trying to become human. Only it had gotten the details wrong. I exploded onto the paved road and took off in what direction I thought the highway had been, keeping an eye out for the creature. I saw it pacing along the rooftops, tracking me through the flickering sodium vapor lights. By the time I hit the highway, the thing seemed to be gone, but I couldn't be sure. I think that was when I realized that the tears were shattering on my thighs, that I was gasping in air through sobs. So I drove. Not towards home, not towards anywhere in particular. I pushed the speed limit, trying to put as much distance between me and the awful, awful cabin as I could. It wasn't until I felt something buzzing at my feet that I thought about stopping. In the chaos, my phone had fallen to the floor. I grabbed at it and saw that I had a dozen texts from my dad and 20 missed calls. My tears changed then, no longer those of an escapee. They were the tears of someone about to be rescued. I pulled into a rest stop and called him, sniffling. I tried to explain, but before I could, he cut me off and asked where I was. I read him the address of the stop. "Tell me everything," he said. I could hear him getting into his Nissan. So I did. I told him everything. I know that in stories like mine, the teenage daughter always holds back details, so she isn't thrown in a mental hospital. But I didn't even think about that. I told my dad about the movie, about the tuna mac, about Mom saying that she just had to go feed some cats. When I told him about seeing the first creature behind the shed, I threw up in the passenger seat. When my dad eventually got to me, I fell into his arms and sobbed and screamed and shook. My father, the middle-aged IT professional with a bad hip, helped me like he had helped me when I was 5. "We're going to call the police," he said, running his hands through my hair. "We're going to tell them the important bits. She took you to a strange place and made you feel afraid, right?" "But how? I don't think we can explain the other parts, honey. But I don't think it makes much of a difference either way." I nodded. That made sense. We were halfway back home when the weight of the night settled over me, waves of tiredness washing me away to unconsciousness. I looked at the clock and smiled when I woke up. It was 7 a.m. "On the dot," I said, starting to drift away. "On the dot, kiddo, just like I said." That was a week ago. After we talked to the police, they sent a patrol car up to the cabin for my mom. When they got there, no one was around. All they found was an empty bag of dog food next to a bowl, with my mother's shoes neatly beside it. According to the county records, the cabin's been abandoned for decades. The last owner had died before the turn of the century, and the land deed was split between his children. The police talked to all of them, but none of them have any connections to my mom. They assured us that they're still looking into it, but I'm not holding my breath. Doesn't matter anyway, because we're leaving. The house is already listed. My dad's been doing online interviews for a new job in a new city. He stayed home from work all week, and he called me out of school. We keep the doors locked and the windows drawn. The revolver he normally keeps in a safe is always nearby. As soon as he can lock down a new job, he says we're booking our flights. We're getting the hell out of this town, from my mom and from those monsters. In the meantime, we're sleeping in the family room. I sleep on a pull-out while Dad sleeps in the love seat. He's watching over me. I can't wait to leave, though, because sometimes, as hard as he tries, my hero falls asleep, and sometimes when he does, and I listen really close to the silence, I can hear that awful, awful singing. And every night, it's getting a little bit closer. I see I haven't scared you off yet. Well, let's see if we can't fix that with our next tale of horror. This one comes straight out of the woods on a little camping trip. This story is no Pinocchio tale, and will maybe make you be on the lookout for the strange and terrifying clickety-clackety. I know it sounds silly, but has anyone ever heard this old poem about the clickety-clackety? I don't know if it's just something from my small town that they kept alive or what, but I've been trying to do some research about it for the last few weeks. I haven't come up with much, and I'm looking for help. Honestly, at this point, I'm really begging for someone who has some information on this thing to step forward. But this is the poem I'm talking about. In these woods there lives a puppet. It sits and watches all who pass, with eyes of coal and teeth of rust, with skin crackling and full of crust. With wiry limbs, brittle as spent glass, it moves with subtle creaks and cracks. So if you're ever in the woods and see a puppet sitting near, do not look at it, no matter your fear. Just pretend you're okay. That's truly all I can say. In these woods, there lives a puppet. For some context, I live in the southern edge of Wisconsin. My family has always been pretty savvy when it comes to camping, and it was a big thing for my brother Paul and I growing up. We always had fun during family camping trips. But flash forward 20 years, and my parents have since passed on. There was a bad car accident, and the loss hit us unexpectedly. So, as a little remembrance trip, my brother and I had planned a final journey up into the woods that our family had frequented. It's up near the town of Clements, Wisconsin. It's where my family had always camped, but this time we were going in deeper into the woods, just to have a little extra privacy from the normal campground tenants. Plus, we were planning on getting a little drunk, so we didn't want any officers kicking us out. So, we made our plans. We were going to meet at 3 p.m. on Friday afternoon in the parking lot of the Clements Park campground, after which we'd head up north for a couple of hours. We'd found a decent spot in a clearing through Google Map, and we wanted to check it out. After all was said and done, the plan was to head back to our cars on Sunday afternoon. It was just a dumb, drunk, grieving kind of weekend getaway. We both wanted to talk things through, but neither of us could really be described as the going through armchair therapy sort of people. This is just how we handled things. But once Friday came around, things immediately went south. I'd parked my car in the run-down dirt lot of the Clements Park around 2:30. There were a few scattered cars of other campers littered around the dirt field, but nothing really of note. In a way, I felt relieved that I wouldn't have to exchange pleasantries with any old family friends. But although I didn't see any familiar people, I did see familiar faces. The trees that had stood tall since I was a kid still remained in their proper places. They held on rebelliously firm to their plots and were left untouched by time. If anything, they had appeared larger to me that day. They had loomed over me with an intensity that I hadn't felt in years. Either they had grown larger, or I had felt much smaller. With a deep breath, I took in the strong, nostalgic smell of the cypress and pine trees that filled the woods. It had always amazed me that the memory could be triggered so heavily with scent. The smell of fresh trees and dirt had taken me back to simpler times of life, when you entrusted your whole being to the care of others, when you were so little that your parents had seemed unstoppable by the forces of nature. You felt carefree because your parents could protect you. You never had to worry about yourself. Now that I was an adult, I knew that whole premise was faulty from the start. When death arrives, it arrives. It doesn't matter how much experience or wisdom you have. It has always, and will always, take what it wants. After a few minutes, I checked my phone and saw 2 unread text messages from Paul. He wrote that he was going to be a few hours late due to work, but told me to just go ahead without him. He said he'd meet me at the clearing sometime in the evening. I remember feeling disappointed in him. I know it wasn't his fault. He had a rough job. But this was supposed to be our time together. Our time to BS and get everything off our chest. I knew that at the end of the day, there was nothing I could do about it. I just thought, whatever, and kept moving about with our plans. I walked behind my rusted little Honda Civic and popped open the trunk. What was inside my beaten-up sedan was worth more to me than my entire life's work. Right in front of me lay the same beaten-up rucksack that my dad had always taken with us. When he passed, my brother and I found all his camping gear still prepped and ready to go in the garage. At that point, we hadn't camped together for at least a decade. As a man, I held back tears as we found it. I think Paul had too. "Hey, Dad," I remembered saying as I picked up the heavy bag. "We're going on another trip together. Paul will be here soon." I looked towards the dirt path leading deeper into the woods and knew it was going to be one hell of a trek forward. It was pretty well known in our town that the trees in Clements Woods weren't exactly easy to travel through. There were thick patches of dry, rotted tree limbs that had entangled and knotted around each other. One bad foot placement, and you'd end up snapping more than just tree limbs. With that in the back of my mind, I started my journey. The first thing you have to pass through is the standard campsites. They were full of beat-up trailers and half-assed tents. We called most of the trailers out there the regulars. They pretty much lived out there during the summer. They were good people, just a little odd. Once you got past most of them, you finally hit the start of Clements Trail. It's less of a sanctioned path and more of a dusty foot trail. Years of fishermen coming and going had created a thin line of dirt that my family had enjoyed walking through for well over a decade. My brother and I walked down that exact path time and time again with our parents. It was basically a mile loop around a lake that happened to find itself surrounded by jack pines and red cedars that had made up the bulk of Clements' ecosystem. Past that was relatively untouched land. Now, was it legal for us to camp out past the sanctioned areas? Probably not. But what conservation officer would head several hours into the woods on a hunch there might be some buffoons grieving out there? So I pressed forward, continuing northward as I went into the depths of the tree line. Before I knew it, the Clements campground were out of sight and out of mind. During my hike, I used the sun as my marker and kept a good pace. I was actually a little ahead of schedule without having to keep pace with Paul. Incredibly, it was just over an hour of me walking due north that I started noticing something. There was this odd creaking noise coming from the distance just beyond me. It didn't sound like much of anything at first, just kind of like a tree cracking in the breeze. But when it kept happening, always the same distance away and always directly behind me, I started to get an odd feeling creeping up against the back of my mind. Yet every time I turned around to look at whatever was making that noise, I'd see the gentle swaying of green leaves overhead and the sand-colored trunks of the cedar trees, and nothing else. So every time I got that odd feeling running up my spine, I'd turn around and see nothing, then just keep marching on. This happened over and over again. It wasn't until I got to the clearing that something else popped into my head. I hadn't heard a single bird call that entire walk. Aside from the creaking of tree branches and the whistling of the wind, it had been dead quiet. But once again, I pushed it out of my mind. I shifted my focus to setting up the campsite for Paul and I. The clearing we had chosen was perfect. It actually looked better in person than it did on the overhead view from online. It was an almost perfect circle of grass, surrounded by a dense woodline. You could see the sun overhead, casting its dim glow from just over the top of the green canopy. I relaxed my mind a bit, now that I had gotten safely to our makeshift campsite. I went through the mental checklist of everything I had to prepare for the night. I started with the fire. I collected a few big stones that littered the forest floor and formed a little rock pit in the dead center of the clearing. Shortly after that, I made a big pile of dry firewood that I had found scattered around the ground. I did my best to fill the fire pit with the best wood I could find, and tried to spark the tinder with my dad's fire starter. The fire starter went off without a hitch, and it was just in time for the evening sun to start cresting over the horizon. Even though I felt a little rushed setting up the campsite on my own, there was something relaxing about focusing on a single task. I wished Paul was with me, but part of me needed some silence to sort out my own thoughts. The fire provided enough light for me to set up the three-man tent without issue. Before long, I was sitting by the fire, getting ready to open up the cooler and have a drink. That's when I finally got the text from my brother. "Hey, just FYI, I just got here. I'll be there in about 2 hours." I know a lot of you probably think hiking in the woods in the dark is stupid. You're right, we aren't the brightest tools in the shed, but we had an oversized ego for our capabilities. We'd been hiking and camping on our own for so long that it felt like second nature to us. I just texted him back with my thumbs up and fished out a drink. I sat my back against a broken cedar trunk near the fire and looked at my handiwork. "Here's to you, Mom and Dad," I muttered, before having a sip of my drink. Before I knew it, the cans had gathered next to me, and my eyes had gotten heavy. My eyes were half closed when I heard the same clinking noise I'd heard earlier. It was just outside the clearing, in the darkening woodline. My eyes drifted towards the edge of the trees and focused in on something directly across from me. There in the darkness of the sunless forest was a vague shape of something. It was barely noticeable in the shadows. It stood about 4 feet tall, and it was facing me. I slowly leaned myself forward off the tree trunk, my eyes fixated on the small, dark form. I was expecting it to turn and run away from me. It wouldn't have been the first time that I'd been spooked by a deer in the night. I thought to myself that any second now I'd hear the skittering of the deer hooves as they scampered back into the woods. But that's not what happened. As my eyes were focused on the little shape, it started to walk towards me. And by walk, I mean walk. Even with it being cast in shadow, I could tell that it had the frame of a small child. It was deathly thin and gaunt. It moved with a sense of weightlessness to it. The moment that it passed into the camp's clearing, the fire licked its face with light. Even through my drunken eyes, I could see what it was. It was the face of an old wooden marionette. I felt my heart lurch up in my throat. My body had instantly skipped the fight-or-flight response and went straight into freeze. I could no more lift a finger of my hand. All I could do was watch and examine the puppet's features. The wood was old and weathered, cracks and chips layering its pale skin. The eyes themselves were dark and empty, and the mouth was just a gaping hole full of rusted metal false teeth. It had what appeared to be human hair matted over its wooden scalp. It was just staring at me. Time passed, and it just kept staring. I worked up enough courage to slowly slide my hands towards my flashlight. I slowly aimed the bulb towards the thing at the edge of the camp and flipped the switch. Immediately, the puppet shot its hands up in the air and jittered its way towards me. Loud cracking and popping of aged wood filled the campsite. Its feet had glided its way over the forest floor as if it were floating, its knees bounding high up in the air with every mocking step. The clattering sound of wood on wood jangling in the empty void of darkness still haunts me. I dropped my flashlight and fell into the fetal position, completely curling up. My subconscious told me that I was already dead, and my body had totally given up in response. I counted the seconds in my head, waiting for whatever nightmare was about to befall me. But it didn't. I lay on the forest floor in a tight ball for God knows how many minutes. Eventually, I worked up the courage to take a glance at my tormentor. Through my fingers, I peered into my campsite, praying that the thing would be gone. But the puppet was still there. It was now halfway between the fire and me. The wind was blowing against its hardened skin, creaking its body ever so slightly with every gentle gust. Out of its mouth came a light clicking noise, almost like an infestation of woodworms, all calling out. What do I do? I remember repeating in my head, what do I do? Then I remembered the poem from when I was a kid. I remembered what it said. Just pretend you're okay. So I slowly sat up and kept the puppet in my peripheral vision. It turned to face me, but I did my best not to pay attention. You're at camp. Act like you're at camp, I silently recited to myself. I noticed that the fires of the fire pit had begun to dim. I needed to stock the pit again before the light went out completely. I looked over to the large stock of dry wood I'd collected earlier. I thanked God that I'd been smart enough to make a pile before sitting down for the night. The timber couldn't have been more than 10 feet away from me, but when I went to take a step towards the dry wood, my legs nearly gave out from under me. I was shaking bad. I heard the puppet begin to creak its way back up behind me. Maybe it noticed my fear. Maybe it knew I wasn't acting right. My intuition was flaring up in my mind like red-hot coals, that this thing wasn't just something I could run from. I had to play the game. Get the firewood. Don't acknowledge it. Just get the firewood. I straightened myself up and walked as casually as I could over to the bundle of fallen tree branches and limbs. I picked up a large handful and turned around. The marionette was standing just behind me, its coal-black eyes looking at my face. The clicking noise that was escaping its mouth sent a nearly uncontrollable fear through my body. But I pressed on. I walked in a straight line towards the fire pit, narrowly missing the wooden body of the doll. I took a knee to be near the warm flames and dropped the wood down next to me. Handful by handful, I placed the branches in the pit. The creaking of the doll had made its way over to my side as I stoked the flames. I glanced down at my thigh as the doll placed its thin, rotten hand against me. At that moment, I wanted to jump up and run away as far and as fast as I could, but instead I ignored that feeling. I ignored it as the tears welled up in my eyes. I took a stand near the fire and gathered my strength. I closed my eyes and took one last breath of night air before walking over to the tent. As soon as I walked into it, I zipped the door closed behind me. I saw the silhouette of the puppet standing right on the other side of the plastic sheeting, illuminated by the fire behind it. I finally cried. In hushed tones, I cried as long as I could remember. I went to look at my cell phone, let my brother know not to come down there, to tell him to go back to his car and get the conservation officer out here as soon as he could. But when I reached for my pocket, it hit me. I'd left my phone outside near the broken tree stump. I glanced back out at the shadow just outside my tent. It was facing me. It felt like it could see me through the thin layer of fabric that lay between us. I tried to gather up my courage to walk outside my tent and grab the phone, but I couldn't. I just sat there in my tent until I heard footsteps walking up to the campsite. "Hey, Jules, you up?" I stayed silent as Paul called out to me. "Sorry I'm late, but..." "What the hell is that?" he gasped. I heard the panic in Paul's voice. I watched the shadow as the puppet turned to face him. Its arms and legs jerked violently in the air. Paul turned as fast as he could and ran out of the clearing. The puppet followed him with impossible speed. It glided, its dangling, flailing limbs in the air as it began its chase. Not even a minute later, I heard a horrified yelp and complete silence. I stayed in the tent all night, numb, broken, defeated. I just continually asked myself why I didn't say anything, why I didn't do anything. By the time morning came, I had left camp, picking up my phone and trying to dial Paul over and over again. There was never an answer. I left everything I brought in that exact spot. I never went back for it. I left those woods in a half daze that I've never recovered from. Before I knew it, I was back in the campground. I contacted the officers in charge of the area, and they conducted a search. They refused to listen to anything I had to say about what I'd seen. But the thing is, they didn't just dismiss it like I was crazy. It was like they'd already known what had happened and had refused to acknowledge it. We never found my brother. I could never take another walk in those woods either. I left the searching up to the police and the local volunteers. What I can do is ask a question. Does anyone know anything about the old clickety-clackety story? That rain sounds nice. Almost makes me want to take a little nap. Though, I certainly couldn't recommend it. Not in Grandpa's chair, at least. I tried to sleep, but I remembered the black skies, the lightning too. It was all around me. I remembered each flash as time began to blur. Each flash had lit him up that evening, revealing to me the ravages of his face, of his pale, disheveled, decaying body, of the clothes which had ages and ages ago been white, torn now in several places, yellowing and covered in stains. I had shuddered at the sight, tempted to shut my eyes, his eyes too, as they glared and kept glaring at me, through me. Ma hadn't seen him, as always. She had in fact floated right past the rocking chair that had once been his favorite spot to read, but to me, he had never been more real. He had been in the chair that day as well. One doesn't simply abandon an old favorite, after all. Hunched over, with limbs bent in awkward ways, and skin clinging onto bones for dear life. A grotesque, formless lump, a shadow. Yet he had been anything but quiet. The rumbling thunder had failed to drown out the sounds of his chattering teeth ringing in my ears. Had I imagined that look in his eyes? Had I imagined his raspy voice trying to call out my name? "Bordoizila is going home," Ma had whispered, standing by the kitchen window while smiling at the storm outside, at the trees flailing about in answer to the angry wind. I had known that name quite well, known just as well the havoc its owner was famous for wreaking wherever she went. Bordoizila, the newly married wind spirit, rushing through the towns and villages in her path, eagerly making her way back to her mother on her first trip home from her husband's house. That was the tale, told and retold for centuries within every house in Assam by wizened old mouths with tobacco-stained teeth, holding the attention of every child sitting there. I had inched closer and closer to Ma, the fear of the ghost getting the better of me, as it often did. Seldom had I seen such peace on her face as I saw at that moment. For the longest time, Ma had continued to look out into our backyard in silence. The wind had cried and howled, so loud I had tugged hard at her stole, insisting upon her presence, squealing to her how he had long been glaring at me. Much like on the occasions gone by, Ma had rolled her eyes. "Not this again," her gaze had seemed to tell me. "Can no one in this house let me have a moment to myself?" Barely turning, she had passed me the bowl soon after, half filled with flattened rice and mashed bananas and bread, along with a glass of water. "Give this to your grandfather. Go on," she said, before turning back to the window. I had no choice. Slowly, my trembling hands had taken the bowl up to him. I remember those skies very well. I remember them as a 10-year-old, when he, too, had at last traveled homeward one night. Death had come for my grandfather, almost begrudgingly, one would think, in his sleep, close to a year after that stormy April evening. Strangely enough, I remember them best now, when most other things are hard to remember. All the faces, the names, the numbers, when the grays and whites mingle in my matted hair as I lie in bed, every day dragging on longer than a year. I can feel my form shrinking to nothing. I can feel the wind outside growing stronger. I think we all have a dog we might like to see come back again. Perhaps an old pet, perhaps a new friend. This dog, however, maybe should have stayed lost. It's My Dog Ran Away in 1978. I don't know where to start this. It's hard to really put it into words just how shocking this event has come off to me. I guess the best place to start would be to explain what happened. When I was around 10, I had a loving dog named Jocko. He was a husky, and we would go for walks almost every day. One day, however, his rope snapped. He must have seen a squirrel or another small animal and ran off into the woods to chase it. I remember running home in hysterics and explaining what had happened to Dad. He yelled at me, but eventually he went out to his truck and went to go find him. He was gone for about 5 hours, and when he came back, I could tell from his red face and his angered expression that he hadn't found Jocko. Even though I could tell he wasn't coming home, I attempted to ask him if he found my loving dog. "Dad, did you find Jack?" I was immediately slapped in the face and sent off to my room to bed. I was crying into my pillow all night. Jocko was an amazing dog. I'd never loved something more until the night he ran off. I remember his bright red collar with a brass pendant labeled J.O. It had a little dog paw print above his initials. Fast forward to now, I'm 55 years old, and I've been working as a dentist for the last 21 years. I was going outside to collect the mail when I heard the sound of barking and twigs snapping. That was when I remembered Jocko. God, it had been so long since I thought of him. My heart was aching as I went inside and read through my mail. I spoke to myself as I went through all of it. Bill, more bills. Finally, the last envelope revealed itself. The paper was trimmed yellow, clearly signifying how old it was. It had an old red wax stamp that had been burdened with time. It was slightly chipped. I read the date on the envelope, 1978. I was confused. I decided to open it and was amazed to find a letter from my grandpa. Grandpa had died long ago when I was about 17. When I read the letter, each sentence made me feel more like crying than the last. "Hey, Felix. I'm really sorry about Jocko. He was a good boy. I'm sure he'll come back to you someday. He's probably out there chasing squirrels. I hope this letter reaches you and doesn't get stuck in processing or any of that. Sincerely, Grandpa." The last sentence broke the somber mood as I chuckled to myself. The irony of the situation, lightening my day as I started to get ready for work. I checked my phone, 6:34 a.m. I had work in about half an hour, so I went to get some coffee ready while I went to the bedroom. As I walked into my room, I was greeted with a sight that made me feel at home. My bedroom reminded me of my childhood. The ugly old wallpaper, the yellow-stained tiles, the amazing smell of mustiness, greeting me like a warm embrace. I was happy here. As I was getting ready, I heard more barking. I recognized it. I couldn't pinpoint how exactly, but something about it was familiar. As I finally walked out of my bedroom, I stopped in my tracks. I realized what it was and recognized the sound. It was Jocko. It was the same high-pitched, mellow bark that I recognized from my childhood. I immediately rushed out my door. I ran to the back of the house. I frantically rounded the corner to see my childhood best friend lying in the dirt. Immediately, two details popped into my head, which made me happy and confused. I had moved around 700 miles away from my childhood home. And two was, when Jocko ran off, he was around 5 years old. Dogs don't live that long, I thought. Maybe this was a different dog that sounded and looked like Jocko. That thought was immediately disproven as I noticed the bright red collar and the brass pendant around his neck. I ran up to him, and he didn't even seem fazed. He started to groan as I looked at the pendant. The initials read J.O. My hands were shaking so violently, it looked like I was having a seizure. I immediately embraced my long-lost best friend, but something felt wrong. He was way too cold, even for the early morning weather. I sort of flinched, but I didn't care. I hugged him so tightly, I felt my body ache. Finally, I got up and let him inside. He moved weirdly, almost like he was drunk. I chalked it up to his extreme old age, but I noticed how the collar seemed pristine. I immediately called into work and explained how I wasn't going to make it because I wasn't feeling good. As I stood there on the phone, I noticed how my dog kept on bumping into things. Again, I thought it was old age. I couldn't believe I'd found Jocko after all these years anyway. The sleepless nights I had endured over his disappearance. I couldn't help but tear up as I hugged him again. That's when I noticed. Jocko's eyes had turned a brown color. I very vividly remembered him having sapphire blue eyes. In fact, it was such a prominent feature that we nicknamed him Bluey at the time. I was shocked. I didn't know how to react. My emotions were a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and fear. I sort of just stared at him as I analyzed his face. Everything about it seemed crooked. It was like he had slowly morphed. I noticed patches of dark fur I hadn't seen before. His snout seemed more jagged, but the biggest detail was his teeth. They seemed way too sharp and narrow for a dog. I hadn't even seen that in wolves. I sort of pondered as I went to get him food and water. Everything raced through my mind at once. Thoughts like, that's not your dog, or how did he get here? I was so confused, I felt almost dazed as I brought the dish of foul-smelling dog food and tap water to Jocko. I sat it down and watched as his previously sloppy demeanor changed into a fast, focused strut. He elegantly waltzed over to his meal and proceeded to devour it within seconds. Must be hungry, huh, Jock? I said sarcastically. That joking mood changed into something serious as he glanced from his food and stared right at me. He was looking into my eyes as I glanced at him. As odd as it sounds, his eyes seemed human. I can't properly put it into words. I looked at him, but right as I was about to look away, he groaned at me. Now, I swear to you guys, I heard the word help come from that groan. It was like a whisper traveling into the room. I immediately felt sick as I backed away. I don't understand why I decided to do what I did next, but some people make mistakes in a moment of quick thought. I decided to keep Jocko with me. I thought, all of this is just stress. None of this is serious. You probably just heard something. I really had no clue what was about to happen, though. Because I didn't have work that afternoon, I decided that finishing up my basement would be a great idea. I'd been working on this thing for 5 months, and it was a perfect man cave. Hardwood floors, a massive TV. Felt like a perfect hangout place for someone like me. I even had a vintage Atari sitting there to relive my childhood passions. As I slowly crept down the steps, each creak and groan and crack making me feel nervous. I was still quite shaken up from Jocko's sudden appearance, and I had to think for a good minute about what to do. You obviously can't just take in an enormous husky after years and years of not owning a dog. I started to remember how long it had been since I'd seen him last. 1978? That was simply not possible. It was 2023, and that meant that Jocko would be 50 years old. I started to think, what if this was a completely different dog I just brought in? What if he's completely rabid? I started to worry as I shifted damp cardboard boxes in the basement. Each shift made me flinch as I heard the familiar sound of paws stomping on hardwood. I listened as Jocko slowly walked down the wooden stairs. I turned around to see him. His tongue was hanging out. I saw black viscous liquid on his tongue, and I almost gagged. The room was filled up with a pungent odor. Think of roadkill that's been left to rot in the sun. I started to gag even harder as I watched Jocko take very slow steps towards me. It reminded me of a wolf silently approaching its prey. Then I saw the collar, and all previous thoughts of this being a different dog were wiped away. In awe, I watched as he drove me into a corner. Jocko, calm down, boy. It's me. It's Felix. I watched as he perked his head to the side. His ears twitched. That's a good boy. Every word I spoke felt like a challenge. It was actually hard to think. I was so worried about him going crazy, I didn't even notice the silence. There were no more birds fluttering or calling. No more insects or bees. Hell, not even the wind was swaying. It felt hopeless. I didn't know why I dismissed the smell or the black liquid that was on my once beloved dog's tongue. I was just worried about being bitten. I stretched my hand after a bout of thought and began to slowly stroke him. Even though he was clearly old and he'd been outside for decades, his fur still felt the same. It was incredibly smooth. It felt like silk was caressing my hands. I watched as he began to calm down. I finally walked past him and led him up the stairs. I was contemplating calling a vet. After a few minutes of thinking, I decided that it was for the best. Hell, what if Jocko had rabies and he bit me? I shook the thought off and rang up our local vet. After a few minutes of discussing, we decided on an appointment for tomorrow. I sighed. Even a day with Jocko felt like torture. I was actually surprised. After so many years of missing and begging for my dog to come back, I was now contemplating making him go away. Eventually, it fell dark, and the feeling of tiredness swiftly overtook me. I got ready for bed and decided to check up on Jocko before I went to sleep. As I quietly tiptoed down the stairs, each step making me feel more on edge, that was when I heard a very distinct sound. It was like something wet slapping a hard surface. I could hear the echoes. It was coming from the basement. I felt a sense of dread deep in my stomach as I slowly rummaged to find the door to my basement. I noticed something. The door was wide open. I very slowly began to make my way down the stairs. Every hair on my body started to stand up as I made it to the halfway point. It was cold. I felt my body begin to shake violently as the sound got louder and louder. It was reducing my mind to rubble as I finally made it down. What stood in the corner of my basement was something that would haunt me, even as I lost my memories. Jocko stood there silently on his hind legs. He had something in his mouth. The moon illuminated him through the basement window, and it revealed the blood dripping from his teeth. Finally, I realized what it was. It was the collar of my dog. It had been ripped off of him and still had clumps of fur and parts of it on his neck. It had blood staining it. I immediately looked at this thing's neck and came to a horrible realization. That same collar was on its neck. This was not my dog that stood before me. I let out a yelp, and suddenly there was silence. My mind felt frozen as this thing turned around to see me. Its face was so horribly mangled I could see little bits of mange littering its face like spots of paint. Its eyes were black. I could see my own reflection in them, like a mirror. Then I watched as it dropped the collar, and now presumably my dead dog, as it slowly approached me. It walked like a human. I finally found the courage to get away as I ran. As I made it up the stairs and out the door, that thing chased after me. It slammed into my glass sliding door, making it shatter. It let out a horrible yelp. It stood between me and the only place I could now use as an escape. I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran up the stairs and went into my room. I slammed the door shut and locked it as I began to barricade myself with loose furniture. I ran over to my phone and dialed 911, the feeling of hopelessness and sorrow only slightly fading away as the feeling of another person speaking to me came on the line. 911, what's your emergency? Listen, my dog's gone crazy. I'm in my room right now trying to keep it away. It's somewhere in my house. I don't know where. Please just send help. I heard the sound of shuffling on the other end of the line. All right, sir. Make sure to stay on the line and keep out of sight, okay? Everything's going to be okay. What's your address? The sound of horrible screaming and rummaging began to litter the air like a pathogen as I continued. 178 Mangrove Drive. Please send help. I don't know how much longer I can bear this. That's when I looked out the window. I saw the face of my dog looking at me. I lost my breath almost immediately. Its face began to warp into a human. Its skin was white. It smiled at me. How was it this tall? Oh, God, my dog's looking at me. It wants to kill me. Please send help. Oh, my God. I told these things to the operator as I stared back at the thing. It put its unnaturally slender hand up to its mouth and made a shushing gesture. I screamed, but it didn't last long as I felt the elevating sounds of this thing's horrible chuckle. I felt so alone. It kept on looking at me with its horrible grin, its smile so large as it stretched beyond my window. Then it showed me something that has me crying while I write this. I watched in terror as its hands reached down and pulled something off the ground. It began to pull up a gray fur-covered body. It was Jocko. I could see the red collar on its decapitated body. I began to cry maniacally. Why was this happening? Was this all a dream? Sir, we're 2 minutes away. Hang in there. The voice on the line echoed as a feeling of hope began to fill my body. Something that quickly faded as the thing began to put its hand to my window. I watched as it began to feel around before finally pulling it open. The squeal of the window finally reached the top, and I began to sob. I was ready to accept death. It took the body of my mangled dog and threw it into the room. It landed at my feet, the blood pooling the carpet making it look like red wine had spilled everywhere. I began to embrace my long-gone friend in my lap as I watched the thing smile at me. I heard it stomp as it began to walk away. I didn't care for my life anymore. I sat there crying and hugging my dead best friend. "Jocko, no," I quietly uttered as I held him in my lap. I heard the fading sounds of sirens began to approach as I sat there with my dog. The rest of it's a blur. I woke up in the hospital. I don't know how, but I'd cuts littered all over my body. I thought it was from me hurrying to barricade my door, or the glass from the initial impact of that thing slamming into my sliding door. It's been 2 days now. I'm still in the hospital. I don't know what's happening. My house is being investigated. I might be sent to jail under suspicion of animal abuse and neglect, but I'm not so sure. I love you, Jocko. I wish you'd never ran away. We all have strange habits as children. Maybe we have imaginary friends. Maybe we talk to those who aren't quite there. But it's a certainty that if you've ever seen the parkour man, you'd remember him. The year is 1999. I was only 5 at the time, but I remember seeing it for the first time. A man who was parkouring and keeping up with the car. It would leap great distances and land every single jump. They would also grab swings and poles and run along the telephone wires. I was so invested in this imaginary being that I would name them Parkour Man. I'm almost certain anyone reading this has done the same in some capacity. But I never really thought too deeply about it, or why this was a phenomenon that we all share. Like the cool S that everyone used to draw, no one knows the origin of that parkour guy. Ever since I've gotten older, my ability to imagine the guy has gotten worse and worse, and eventually it stopped existing altogether. That is until last week. Monday of last week, to be exact. So ever since I was a child, I would get crazy migraines and body pains. I would also complain to my parents, saying how much it hurt, but they always chalked it up to growing pains or ADHD. Strangely enough, the pains and migraines started to become less and less frequent as I got older. This was the same time I started seeing less and less of the parkour man. Fast forward, and I'm now 29 and starting to get random pains and migraines again that I can't explain. So I did the adult thing and went to a doctor about my issues. They did some tests on my blood pressure and a urinalysis, and the doctor called me after a day or two. To my surprise, he told me I was just dehydrated and to drink plenty of water. I drink about 1 gallon of water a day. I don't know how I'm dehydrated. Eventually, my migraines became so frequent, my wife would be the one driving me around because I couldn't focus on the road with the pain I was in. Monday was when I started to see it again. The parkour man jumping from streetlight to building and down. Graciously tumbling and climbing. However, he was different this time. The parkour guy I knew wore a ninja mask and wore black clothes, but this one was just a silhouette, and he was constantly staring at me. I looked at my wife as we were going to my next appointment to resolve the problem and asked, "Have you ever looked out the window of a moving car and seen one of those imaginary parkour guys running alongside?" "Well, yeah, I do vaguely, but my life was different when I was a kid, and I couldn't sit still. I haven't in a while, but I imagine I would if I had to ride passenger all the time." She laughed, and I laughed along with her. I didn't tell her that he looked different, or that it was staring at me, or that I saw him at all. The doctor that day was confused about how I was still dehydrated, and prescribed me pills that would help with water retention. My health has declined, and I was starting to feel weaker and weaker as the day went by. Each day felt like I was crawling to get by, and my energy was way down. 3 nights ago, I was awoken by a strange sound coming from the kitchen. My head was pounding and my mouth was dry and sticky. That sound was probably the migraines playing tricks on me, so I would get up and get some water, I told myself, to calm my nerves more than anything. I slowly stumbled to the fridge where we kept a gallon of filtered water for when I needed something to drink, and I also grabbed a couple of Tylenol quick releases to help with the pain. I put the pills in my mouth and drank so much water I had to gasp for air. After I closed the fridge, I heard another strange sound, but this one was outside on my back porch. My porch is about 30 feet off the ground because the house is built on a steep hill. I walked with one eye open to see what it was. I looked around with the blurry vision I had and saw it hanging from my porch, staring at me, though I could only see the top of its fingers and its eyes. Its face was always blank or blurry, but this time I could see its deep black eyes and pale skin. There was a sheen of water on top of its head. I slowly backed away, thinking this may be a hallucination due to fever or pain. I just went back to bed and tried my best to ignore it. The next day I got up and went to the kitchen for more water, and I looked at the porch. The door was wide open. There was no sign of forced entry either, only a single set of footprints entering the home and vanishing once it passed the rear door. Ever since seeing that, I had a strange feeling I was being watched, no matter if I was inside or outside. I could feel it watching me with those black eyes. Throughout the day, I kept experiencing the feeling of unease and dread. The day seemed to drag on, and now and then I would catch a glimpse of the man in the mirror or the glass. I had another appointment that morning and needed to leave. My headache had gotten worse, but the pain and fatigue had been getting better. While inside the car, I laid my head against the cool glass, which gave me a moment of reprieve from the heat and the migraine that I've been dealing with. I usually closed my eyes, but the feeling of being watched kept me from dropping my guard and sleeping. Looking through the window, I could see it standing in front of the car. This time, I got to see its whole face. Pale white skin with deep black eyes, but no mouth or nose. He only had holes on the sides of his head, which I assumed were his ear holes. Seeing it standing in front of the car shocked me to my core, and I screamed in terror. My wife tried to comfort me by showing me there was nothing there. She stepped out of the car and stood right where it did, and he disappeared behind her. "See, hun? You're just going through delirium due to dehydration. I love you. It's going to be okay." She spoke in a calming voice. However, I knew better. I knew it was real. I don't know what it wanted, but I could feel it was waiting for me to be alone. As we pulled away, I could see its blank, expressionless stare as it stood in our driveway, watching me ride away. As we traveled the old streets in the downtown section of my city, I would catch a glimpse of it, staring at me and not moving. It would be on top of a building. Cold, expressionless eyes would meet me and cause me dread and anxiety, as if it was there and there was nothing I could do. I tried my best to look away, but every time I would, it would show up in the center of my vision. I tried closing my eyes, but I could still see it in my head, staring. We arrived at the doctor's office, an off-tan building with a blue tin roof. A sign on the building in an orange hue declared it to be Mercy Medical Center, and it was shining with light. I felt my fear response speak in my chest, telling me not to enter the place, as I was going to die by walking in. The gates of Tartarus were standing in front of me, wanting me all the more. My wife tugged on my shirt and held my hand, guiding me through, her face shining through my fuzzy vision. With her help, I was able to get to my doctor and start talking. Before we started, I had to sign a few forms, which I couldn't remember what was for. An experimental drug, but it was supposed to help. This is a new type of drug meant to target the part of the brain that controls blood pressure and nerves. It seems that your blood pressure is really high, and this should bring it down. We can only guess that it's a hypertensive crisis that's been drawn out for a week, but
Since the condition is pretty scary, we've been trying to get you into whatever we can to monitor you. I can give you a shot to take this medication, get it working now, and it'll last all day until around 6 a.m. He pulled out a syringe and plunged it gently into my arm. I sighed in relief as the medicine coursed through my veins. I could feel the pressure of my head reducing and the fuzzy blur starting to sharpen and fade away. I shook his hand and left with my wife. It was such a relief. I cried on the car ride home, being able to look out into the bright midday sky and feel the warmth of the sun on my skin without any of it being overbearing on my body. Best of all, it was no longer in sight, and the feeling of dread and overwhelming anxiety was fading into obscurity. Before we got home, we stopped at the local CVS to get the prescription needed. I got home, and the colors were brighter than normal, and everything felt better, cleaner, fresher. The lights in my room were clearer, and the smell of the home felt more crisp. Everything was fine, with no sign of it, and I just forgot all about it as well. I let my guard down. Last night, my dreams were a vivid tapestry of vibrant colors and motions that only Van Gogh could illustrate. It was surreal and amazing, however, this bliss that came to an abrupt stop when I was awoken by my wife's crying. "What's wrong, honey?" I said in a worried tone. The only thing illuminating the room was a soft green light shining from the alarm clock, saying it was 3 a.m. "It wants you, but you keep running. Why do you keep running?" she said. What do you mean?" I said, as I reached towards her hand to move them off her face. As her hands pulled down, I stared in abstract horror. Her eyes were missing, and ink ran down her face. "It needs you." My wife, what I thought was my wife, started to contort vocally and physically. Her bones snapped like fresh celery, and her voice became static as she brought her arms over her head to grab the bottom of her jaw and pull it sharply, ripping it off. The bed was flooded by her warm, viscous blood. In my horror, she kept crawling towards me, crying, asking me to stop taking the medicine. I looked towards the nightstand and saw it standing in the background, smiling at me from a mouth made from tattered flesh and gnarled teeth and the same black eyes. Before I could take the medication, it grabbed my wrist and leaned in close. "You have seen so much. You'll run out eventually, and when you do, I'll welcome you into the void." The searing pain left a black mark on my arm, and I reeled away, and as it just stood there, staring at me. I grabbed the pills and took one quickly, hoping the nightmare would end. It was when I woke up from the dream. My wife was there, sleeping soundly, and I reached over to see her face, but it was normal. I got up to go to the bathroom and wash my face for a minute. The cold water woke me up more. The sudden realization made me almost vomit. Knowing what I was seeing was as real as it felt. I looked down at my arm. It's a handprint. It's black on my arm, like a fresh tattoo. I only have 30 days of pills, with my doctors no re-upping on them since they're experimental. Even typing this now, I can see him on my black screen, staring at my every move. What do you do when you meet an impossible situation like this?
Oh, bother. Sounds like the rain might be stopping. Sounds like it might also be a perfect time for me to let you get back to life in general. Till next time, Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful day and an even better evening.